24 hours ago, it had been crystal clear water reflecting the Arizona sun. Now it was filled with something that would make the evening news, destroy his marriage, and send his neighbor Karen to prison. The detective's voice cut through the desert air. "Sir, we're going to need you to stay back from the scene." Marcus laughed a bitter, broken sound. If only he'd listened to his gut about Karen from the beginning. If only he'd known that her obsession with his Marcus Hartwell had always prided himself on reading people. 22 years as a construction foreman had taught him to spot trouble before it started: the worker who'd cut corners, the contractor who'd skimp on materials, the homeowner who'd change their mind halfway through a project. But somehow, he'd missed the signs with Karen Pemberton. The first red flag should have been the way she watched him from her kitchen window every morning as he drank his coffee on the back patio. Not the casual glance of a friendly neighbor, but the focused intensity of someone cataloging every detail. The second should have been how she appeared at his property line within minutes of any outdoor activity, always with some transparent excuse about checking her sprinkler system or retrieving a wayward cat that Marcus had never actually seen. The third and most obvious should have been her reaction to the pool. Marcus had saved for 3 years to build it. After his divorce from Linda, the house had felt too empty, too quiet. The pool was supposed to be a fresh start, a reason to have friends over, maybe even start dating again. He'd hired the best crew in Phoenix, spared no expense on the design. Infinity Edge, built-in spa, LED lighting that could shift through any color imaginable. It was his pride and joy, visible from every window at the back of his house. Karen had appeared at the construction site on day 2, wearing a sundress that was too young for her 45 years and carrying a plate of cookies that looked store-bought, despite their homemade presentation. "Oh my," she'd said, her voice carrying that artificially sweet tone that made Marcus's teeth ache. "This is going to be quite the addition to the neighborhood." "Thanks," Marcus had replied, accepting the cookies out of politeness. "Should be finished in about 6 weeks." 6 weeks. She'd repeated it like she was memorizing the date. "And I suppose you'll be having parties." "Lots of people over." Something in her tone had made Marcus look up from the blueprints. Karen was staring at the excavation site with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not disapproval exactly, but something more intense, possessive. "Just friends occasionally," he'd said carefully. "Nothing too wild. I'm not really the party type." "Oh, I'm sure you're not." Her smile had been sharp enough to cut glass. "You seem like such a considerate neighbor." The construction had proceeded without incident, but Karen's attention had escalated. She'd taken to walking her property line twice daily, always when Marcus was outside. She'd started wearing increasingly revealing outfits during these walks. Despite the fact that Marcus had never given her any encouragement, when he'd hired a cleaning crew to maintain the pool, she'd introduced herself as Marcus's very close friend and interrogated them about their schedule. The breaking point had come 3 weeks after the pool was completed. Marcus had been floating on an inflatable raft, enjoying the first truly peaceful moment he'd had in months, when he'd heard the distinctive click of his back gate opening. He'd sat up, water streaming from his hair, to find Karen standing at the edge of his deck. She was wearing a bikini that left nothing to the imagination, and carrying a bottle of wine. "Karen," he'd said, his voice carefully neutral. "What are you doing in my yard?" "I brought wine," she'd said, as if that explained everything. "I thought we could christen the pool properly." Marcus had climbed out of the water, suddenly, very aware that he was wearing only swim trunks, and that Karen's eyes were mapping every inch of his body. "You can't just walk into my yard uninvited." "Oh, don't be so formal," she'd laughed, setting the wine down on his patio table like she owned the place. "We're neighbors. Neighbors share things. Karen, I need you to leave." The temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the space of a heartbeat. Karen's smile had faltered, then reformed into something harder, more brittle. "Leave. This is inappropriate. You can't just walk into my backyard whenever you feel like it." Inappropriate? She'd tasted the word like it was poison. "I bring you wine, I try to be friendly, and you call me inappropriate. I didn't invite you over. You opened my gate without permission and walked into my private space wearing..." He'd gestured at her bikini. "Wearing what? What's wrong with what I'm wearing?" "Nothing's wrong with it," Marcus had said, though that wasn't entirely true. The bikini was too small, too young, and paired with her aggressive posture, it felt like a weapon. but you're wearing it in my backyard without an invitation." Karen had stood there for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with increasingly rapid breaths. When she'd finally spoken, her voice had been quiet, almost conversational. "You know what your problem is, Marcus? I'm sure you're going to tell me? You think you're better than everyone else. You build this ostentatious pool, you flaunt your success, you parade around half naked in your backyard where everyone can see you, and then you act like you're some kind of victim when someone tries to be friendly. I'm not parading around anywhere. This is my property, your property." She'd laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Everything's about property with you people, isn't it? Well, let me tell you something about property, Marcus. Just because you have a piece of paper that says you own something doesn't mean you deserve it." The words had hit him like a physical blow. Marcus had built his life through hard work, sacrifice, and careful planning. He'd earned every square foot of his property, every dollar that had gone into the pool. "I think you should go home, Karen. I think you should remember that you have to live next to me for a very long time," she'd said, grabbing her wine bottle. "And I have a very good memory." She'd walked away without another word, her bare feet slapping against the concrete. Marcus had stood there for 10 minutes after she'd left, staring at the gate she'd left open, feeling like he'd just dodged a bullet he hadn't seen coming. He'd installed a lock on the gate the next day. Karen had retaliated by filing a complaint with the HOA about the pool lights being too bright. When that was dismissed, she'd complained about the noise from the pool pump, then about the excessive water usage during the drought. Each complaint had been more petty than the last, and each had been dismissed. But Marcus had gotten the message. Karen Pemberton was not going to let this go. The harassment had escalated over the following weeks. She'd started parking her car in such a way that it blocked his driveway. She'd begun playing music late at night, always stopping just before it reached a level that would violate noise ordinances. She'd installed motion sensor lights that would trigger whenever Marcus moved in his backyard, flooding his pool area with harsh white light. The final straw had come when Marcus had woken up to find his pool covered in rose petals, not scattered romantically, but dumped in thick, cloying masses that had clogged his filtration system and required professional cleaning. The roses had been red, the color of blood, and there had been hundreds of them. There had been no note, no explanation, but Marcus had known he'd stood in his backyard at 6 a.m, staring at the mess, and he'd known that Karen was just getting started. He'd called the police, but there had been no proof. Karen had expressed shock and concern when questioned, suggesting that perhaps Marcus had a secret admirer who'd gotten his address confused. The officer had been polite, but skeptical, and Marcus had realized that Karen was smarter than he'd given her credit for. She was building a narrative, the spurned neighbor, the innocent victim of a hostile man who'd rejected her friendly advances. Every complaint she'd filed, every interaction they'd had, was being reframed in her favor. To anyone looking from the outside, Marcus was the aggressor, the wealthy man who'd built an expensive pool and then attacked his neighbor for trying to be friendly. That afternoon, Marcus had called his lawyer. Document everything James Morrison had advised. Every interaction, every incident, every complaint. If this escalates, we'll need a paper trail. How much can it escalate? Marcus had asked. She's just a bitter woman with too much time on her hands. Marcus, I've been practicing law for 30 years. I've seen bitter women with too much time on their hands destroy lives. Don't underestimate her. The warning had proven prophetic. Over the next week, Karen had ramped up her campaign. She'd started a neighborhood Facebook group called Concerned Residents of Maple Street and had begun posting about Marcus's aggressive behavior and intimidation tactics. She'd shared photos of his pool, calling it an eyesore and a waste of resources during a drought. The posts had been carefully crafted, full of reasonable-sounding concerns and subtle implications. She'd never directly accused Marcus of anything actionable, but she'd painted a picture of a man who was hostile. Marcus spent the next 3 days cleaning concrete powder from his pool, each scoop of gray sludge fueling his anger. The damage was worse than he'd initially thought. The fine particles had infiltrated every component of his filtration system, requiring a complete overhaul that would cost nearly $8,000. But the money wasn't what kept him awake at night. It was the realization that Karen had somehow managed to dump 47 bags of concrete mix into his pool without triggering a single motion sensor or security camera. She'd found a blind spot in his defenses, which meant she'd been studying his property more carefully than he'd realized. It also meant she'd been planning this for weeks. "She's escalating," Officer Martinez had confirmed when Marcus filed the report. "This level of property damage shows premeditation. We're looking at potential felony charges now. Didn't catch her in the act, and she's already claiming she has an alibi." Marcus had stared at the officer in disbelief. "What kind of alibi?" "We're verifying, but book clubs are hard to fact-check. Women cover for each other." The casual sexism had made Marcus's jaw clench, but he'd kept his mouth shut. He needed the police on his side, not alienated by his personal politics. "What about the concrete?" "Someone had to buy that much concrete mix. There has to be a record. She paid cash at 3 different stores over 2 weeks. Smart enough to spread it out, never bought more than normal quantities at any one location." "James, this is getting out of hand. She's causing thousands of dollars in damage, and the police act like they can't do anything until she burns my house down." "Actually, this is good news," James had said. "The concrete incident establishes a pattern of escalating behavior. If she does anything else, we can argue that she's a continuing threat. In the meantime, I'm filing for a restraining order." "Will that work?" "It'll put her on notice. Violating a restraining order is a felony, regardless of what she does. It gives the police more tools to work with." The restraining order had been granted 3 days later, was legally prohibited from coming within 100 yards of his property, from contacting him directly or indirectly, and from any further harassment. His relief had lasted exactly 18 hours. Marcus had returned home from work to find his mailbox stuffed with real estate flyers, not the usual neighborhood circulars, but high-end property listings from exclusive communities across the state. Each listing was for a property similar to his own, with handwritten notes in the margins. "This might be more suitable for your lifestyle. Beautiful pool area, very private. Perfect for someone who values discretion." The message was clear. Karen wanted him to move. The flyers had been followed by a parade of service calls. Pool maintenance companies, landscaping crews, pest control services, all claiming they had appointments scheduled by Mrs. Hartwell. Each time, Marcus had to explain that he was divorced, that he hadn't scheduled any services, and that someone was pranking him. The pranks had escalated from annoying to expensive when a concrete truck had arrived at 7 in the morning, ready to pour a new driveway that Marcus had never ordered. The driver had been understanding, but firm someone had to pay the cancellation fee, or he'd be filing a lien against the property. Marcus had paid the $300 fee and added it to his growing file of Karen-related expenses, but the real damage had been to his reputation. The neighborhood Facebook group had exploded with posts about the ongoing drama on Maple Street. Photos of the concrete truck, the parade of service vehicles. "Like the situation is getting worse," Karen had posted. "I'm genuinely concerned for everyone's safety at this point." The post had received dozens of sympathetic responses, with neighbors sharing their own stories of feeling uncomfortable around Marcus. Someone had started a rumor that he was having financial problems, that the pool had been a desperate attempt to impress potential buyers before a foreclosure. Another rumor suggested that his ex-wife had left him because of his temper. Marcus had watched his reputation crumble in real time, each post and comment adding another layer to the narrative Karen was building. He'd considered defending himself, but James had advised against it. "Don't engage," the lawyer had said. "Anything you say can be twisted against you. Let the legal system handle this." But the legal system was moving at a glacial pace, while Karen's campaign continued to accelerate. The breaking point had come when Marcus had discovered that Karen had been contacting his clients. Marcus ran a small construction company. Most of his work came from referrals, and his clients trusted him to handle their projects discreetly and professionally. When Mrs. Chen had called to cancel her kitchen renovation, citing concerns about his stability, Marcus had initially been confused. "I'm not sure what you mean," he'd said. "A woman called me," Mrs. Chen had explained, her voice uncomfortable. "She said she was a neighbor of yours and that you'd been having some kind of breakdown. She said you'd been threatening people and that she was worried about your mental state." Marcus had felt the world tilt sideways. "Mrs. Chen, I can assure you that I'm sorry, Marcus. I know you've done good work for us before, but I can't take the risk." 3 more clients had canceled by the end of the week, each with similar stories. Karen had somehow obtained his client list and was systematically destroying his business relationships. She'd been careful to frame her calls as concerned warnings rather than direct accusations. But the result was the same. Marcus was losing everything. That night, he'd sat in his backyard. Considered Karen's real estate flyers, maybe moving was the answer. Maybe he could start over somewhere else, rebuild his business, get away from the toxic situation that was consuming his life. Then he'd remembered the look in the possessive hunger, the entitled assumption that she had some claim to his property. Moving wouldn't solve the problem, it would reward it. Karen would get what she wanted. He wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, he'd hired a private investigator. "I want to know everything about Karen Pemberton," he'd told the Pie, a weathered ex-cop named Derek Santos. "For dirt, looking for patterns. She's too good at this, too organized, too strategic. I don't think I'm her first victim." Derek had nodded knowingly. "Stalkers usually have a history. Give me a week." The week had passed without incident, which had made Marcus more nervous than relieved. Karen's silence felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. He'd found himself checking his security cameras obsessively, waiting for the next attack. Derek had called with his report on a Friday afternoon, at least twice that I can confirm. "What do you mean?" She lived in Tucson before moving to Phoenix, had a dispute with a neighbor there over a fence line, started with complaints to the city, escalated to harassment, ended with her neighbor's car being vandalized and their business being targeted with negative reviews. Marcus had felt a chill of recognition. What happened? Neighbor moved away, sold the house at a loss, and left the state. And before that, Flagstaff, similar situation, different trigger. She was living in a condo complex, got into it with another resident over parking spaces. Same pattern complaints, harassment, character assassination. That one ended with the other woman's apartment being flooded while she was out of town. Jesus, was she charged? Never enough proof. Karen's smart about that. She knows how to stay just on the legal side of the line while making people's lives miserable. Marcus had absorbed this information in silence, feeling vindicated and terrified in equal measure. So, what's her endgame here? Based on the pattern, she wants you gone, and she's willing to do whatever it takes to make that happen. That night, Marcus had called his sister in Colorado. "Lisa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. If I told you that a neighbor was harassing me, threatening my business, and trying to drive me out of my home, what would you tell me to do?" Lisa had been quiet for a moment. "I'd tell you to call the police." "I did. They can't do anything without proof." "Then I'd tell you to get proof." "I'm trying." "Marcus, what aren't you telling me?" He'd looked out at his pool, at the house he'd worked so hard to afford, at the life he'd built from nothing. "I'm scared, Lisa. I'm scared that she's going to win." "Then don't let her." In Marcus's mind, he'd been playing defense, reacting to Karen's attacks, trying to protect what he had. But Karen was playing offense, and she was better at it than he was. It was time to change the game. The next morning, Marcus had started his own investigation. If Karen had a pattern of behavior, Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the police report about the dead dog, and planned his war against Karen Pemberton. The system had failed him. The police were reactive, not proactive. The courts moved too slowly. If he wanted to stop Karen, he was going to have to do it himself. But he wasn't going to break the law. He was going to use Karen's own tactics against her. The first step was research. If Karen had done this before, she'd left a trail. And if she'd left a trail, there were victims who might be willing to help him expose her. Marcus started with Robert Chen, Karen's first husband. Derek had found an address in Denver, where Robert now worked as an accountant for a mid-size firm. Marcus had called him on Tuesday morning, expecting to be hung up on. Instead, Robert had listened intently to Marcus's story. "She's still doing it," Robert had said, his voice hollow. "I hoped she'd gotten help, but she's still destroying people's lives." "What did she do to you?" "Everything. She convinced my family I was abusing her, got me fired from my job, turned my friends against me. When I finally left her, she spent 2 years trying to destroy my credit, my reputation, my relationships. I had to move across the country to get away from her. Would you be willing to testify about what she did?" I've been waiting 20 years for someone to ask me that question. The second call had been to Janet Morrison, Karen's neighbor in Tucson. Janet had broken down crying when Marcus had explained why he was calling. "She ruined my life," Janet had sobbed. "I lost my house, my business, my marriage, everything, and no one would believe me because she seemed so nice, so reasonable." What happened? It started with the fence line, just like your investigator said, but it became about so much more. She was obsessed with my husband. She wanted him, and when he wouldn't leave me for her, she decided to destroy us both. How? She started rumors that I was having an affair. She vandalized my business, left fake reviews online, called my clients, and told them I was unstable. She even called child services and claimed I was abusing my kids. Marcus had felt sick. Did you report her, of course? But she was careful. Never enough evidence, never quite crossed the line into something the police could act on. Sound familiar? By the end of the week, Marcus had spoken to 7 of Karen's previous victims. Each story was the same systematic harassment, character assassination, and escalating behavior that had driven them from their homes, their communities, their lives. And each victim was eager to help stop her. Marcus had compiled their statements, their evidence, their testimony into a comprehensive dossier. But more importantly, he'd learned Karen's playbook, her methods, her timing, her psychological pressure points. If he was going to beat her, he needed to think like her. The opportunity had come when Marcus had discovered that Karen worked as a part-time bookkeeper for several small businesses in the area. She'd hidden this fact carefully, never mentioning it in any of her online profiles or social media presence. But Derek had found the employment records, and Marcus had realized that Karen's obsession with him was costing her clients. She'd been spending her work hours stalking him, filing complaints, and planning her attacks. Her productivity had dropped. Her reliability had suffered, and her employers were starting to notice. Marcus had started with Mason's Auto Repair, one of Karen's biggest clients. He'd called the owner, Tom Mason, and had arranged a meeting under the pretense of needing work done on his truck. "Tom, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me," Marcus had said as Tom had looked under his hood. "Are you satisfied with Karen Pemberton's work?" Tom had straightened up, his expression wary. "Why are you asking?" "Because she's my neighbor, and she's been causing problems. I'm trying to understand if her behavior is affecting other areas of her life." "What kind of problems?" Marcus had told him. "Not everything, but enough. The harassment, the vandalism, the dead dog." Tom's expression had grown increasingly troubled. "Jesus," Tom had said finally. "I knew she'd been distracted lately, but I didn't realize she's been coming in late, leaving early, spending a lot of time on her phone. Her books have been sloppy too. I've had to fix several mistakes. Have you considered finding a new bookkeeper?" "Yeah, actually. I've been thinking about it for weeks." Marcus had left his business card. "If you need a recommendation, I know several good accountants who do freelance work." He'd had similar conversations with 3 other business owners. Each had expressed dissatisfaction with Karen's recent performance, and each had been given alternative options. Within 2 weeks, Karen had lost 60% of her income. But Marcus wasn't finished. He'd learned from Karen's victims that she was particularly sensitive to public embarrassment, that her carefully constructed image was her greatest weakness. So he'd started dismantling it. The first step had been documenting everything, every interaction, every incident, every piece of evidence. But instead of just filing it away, Marcus had started sharing it strategically. He'd created a private Facebook group called Karen Pemberton Victims and had invited her previous targets to join. The group had grown quickly. Robert Chen had shared photos of the vandalism to his car. Janet Morrison had posted the fake reviews Karen had left for her business. Other victims had contributed their own evidence, creating a comprehensive record of Karen's pattern of behavior. Then Marcus had gone public. He'd created a website called The Truth About Karen Pemberton and had posted everything: court records, police reports, victim statements, photographic evidence. He'd been careful to stick to facts, to avoid editorializing, to present the information objectively. But the facts spoke for themselves. Karen Pemberton was a serial harasser who had destroyed lives across 3 states over 20 years. The website had gone viral in the local community within days. The neighborhood Facebook group had exploded, with comments, shares, and reactions. People who had defended Karen suddenly found themselves questioning their assumptions. Others came forward with their own stories of uncomfortable interactions with her. The tide of public opinion had shifted overnight. But Marcus had underestimated Karen's capacity for retaliation. He'd been working in his garage on Thursday afternoon. When his phone had started buzzing with calls from unknown numbers, the first few had been hang-ups, but then the abuse had started. "You piece of shit," a male voice had snarled. "Leave that poor woman alone. I hope you rot in hell," a woman had screamed. "Karen told us what you really did to her." The calls had continued for hours, dozens of them, all filled with rage and accusations. Marcus had finally turned off his phone, but the damage was done. Karen had mobilized her own network of supporters, and they were hitting back hard. The next morning, Marcus had discovered that someone had spray-painted rapist across his garage door in red letters. His truck had been keyed, his mailbox had been smashed, and someone had thrown rocks through 2 of his windows. The police had taken a report, but Officer Martinez had been blunt about the challenges. "This is coordinated," he'd said. "She's got people believing you're the bad guy. The website probably made things worse from their perspective, so I'm supposed to just take it. You're supposed to be smart about it. Document everything, but don't escalate. We're building a case, but it takes time." That afternoon, Marcus had received a call from his insurance company. Someone had filed a claim stating that he'd sexually assaulted them at a job site. The claim was anonymous, untraceable, but it was enough to trigger an investigation that would freeze his coverage and destroy his reputation. Marcus had sat in his living room, staring at the boarded-up windows, and had realized that Karen had been planning this counterattack all along. She'd been waiting for him to fight back so she could play the victim more convincingly. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd escalated beyond harassment into something more serious. And Marcus had been recording everything. The breakthrough had come when Marcus had reviewed his security footage from the night his garage had been vandalized. The spray painter had been careful to avoid the cameras, but they'd made one error. As they'd fled, they'd passed under a streetlight that had illuminated their face for just a moment. The face had belonged to Karen's nephew. Danny Pemberton was 23, unemployed, and had a minor criminal record. More importantly, he was devoted to his Aunt Karen, who had helped raise him after his parents had died in a car accident. He would do anything for her, including commit felonies. On her behalf, Marcus had taken the footage to the police, and they'd arrested Danny within hours. Faced with clear evidence and the prospect of serious charges, Danny had broken down and confessed not just to the vandalism, but to everything. The fake phone calls, the insurance claim, the coordinated harassment campaign, and he'd implicated Karen in all of it. "She told me you were a predator." Danny had sobbed during his confession. "She said you'd hurt her, that you were going to hurt other women if someone didn't stop you. She said everything we did was to protect people." The confession had been the breakthrough Marcus needed. Danny's testimony, combined with the evidence from Karen's previous victims, had finally given the police enough to act. They'd arrested Karen on charges of criminal harassment, conspiracy, making false reports, and a dozen other offenses. But Marcus's victory had been short-lived.